He met a death so cruel, it would make Nero himself turn pale. Molten gold was forced down his throat, a searing, liquid inferno gushing into his body. He tried to scream, but only a gurgling shriek escaped as the precious metal scalded his insides. In that horrifying moment, Rome's richest man literally choked on his own greed, his body writhing while his captors watched with pitiless eyes. The man suffering this gruesome fate was Marcus Licinius Crassus, often called the richest man in Rome. He was a Roman general and politician, a member of the First Triumvirate, alongside Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. Crassus had spent a lifetime amassing wealth and power, quashing slave rebellions, and financing Rome's elite. Yet, it is not his riches or rank that history remembers most. It is the nightmarish punishment he endured at the end. In a twist of dark irony, Crassus's lust for gold led to a death so brutal that it shocks us even 2 millennia later. And as you'll see, his end was as dramatic and horrifying as any tale in the darkest annals of history. To understand how Crassus came to such a terrible end, we must set the stage. The Roman Republic of the 1st century BC was a realm of soaring ambition and cutthroat politics. Crassus had risen to prominence through shrewd cunning and ruthless action. During Sulla's civil wars, he profiteered from the chaos, buying up burning properties for cheap, then extinguishing the flames with his personal fire brigade. His fortune grew from ashes and blood, earning him a reputation for unscrupulous greed. Crassus was also no stranger to brutality. In 71 BC, he defeated the famous rebel gladiator Spartacus. To warn others against defiance, Crassus ordered 6,000 captured slaves crucified along the Appian Way. Imagine the horror. An endless line of crosses stretching for miles, each bearing a dying man in agony, writhing in the hot Italian sun. This ghastly spectacle seared Crassus's name into the fears of Rome's underclass, a man who would go to any lengths to secure power. Yet for all his wealth and ruthlessness, Crassus lived in the shadow of his rivals. Pompey had military glory. Caesar's star was rising with victories in Gaul. Crassus wanted glory of his own to match his fortune with military triumph. In 53 BC, as governor of Syria, he seized on a grand opportunity: invade Parthia, the wealthy empire to the east. Parthia was fabled for its riches, perhaps even more gold to plunder, and conquering it would immortalize Crassus as a hero of Rome. But this was an invasion driven by greed and ego, not necessity. The Parthians had offered no provocation. Seasoned senators and soothsayers alike warned Crassus of dark omens. Even a Roman tribune publicly cursed the expedition as doomed. Still, Crassus marched east, blinded by ambition, convinced that victory and wealth awaited. Crassus's legions crossed the Euphrates River into Parthian territory, an army of around 40,000 Romans lusting for conquest. At first, all seemed to go well. A few towns surrendered, and the path to glory lay open across the Mesopotamian plains. But this was a false dawn. Crassus made a fateful mistake. He let a crafty local guide lure him away from the rivers and hills into the open desert, where the Parthian army awaited. Under the blazing sun near the town of Carrhae, Crassus led his men into a trap. Without warning, the Parthian cavalry appeared on the horizon, thousands of horsemen in gleaming armor and swift archers with composite bows. The Romans formed squares under a hail of arrows that blotted out the sun. The air filled with the whistle of darts and the thuds of missiles piercing flesh. Roman shields thumped with each deadly impact. Soldiers fell, clutching at arrows that suddenly sprouted from their necks and eyes. Crassus ordered his son, Publius, to lead a charge with the cavalry to chase off the archers. Publius rode out bravely, but the Parthians feigned retreat, then encircled him. In the distant haze, Crassus's men saw a horrifying sight. Publius's head, severed and impaled on a spear, raised high for the Romans to see. The Parthian warriors jeered as they brandished the young man's head, a grotesque trophy meant to shatter the Roman spirit. Crassus stood transfixed, a father watching his legacy destroyed. Panic rippled through the Roman ranks as thirst, exhaustion, and terror set in. By nightfall, thousands of Romans lay dead or dying in the sand. Crassus, devastated and desperate, tried to lead the survivors in a retreat. He had started this war chasing glory and gold. Now he was running for his life under the cover of darkness. But his nightmare had only begun. The Parthians hounded the fleeing Romans, determined not to let their prize escape. Eventually, Surena, the Parthian general, sent an offer of truce, a meeting to negotiate peace. Crassus was trapped and knew it. His men, battered and scared, urged him to accept the parley, anything to stop the suffering. With great reluctance, Crassus agreed to meet Surena. In the gray light of dawn, the Roman commander went to the Parthian camp under a flag of truce. He did not know it, but this step sealed his fate. There would be no mercy for the invader. Crassus's trial was about to begin, not in a court of law, but on the blood-stained soil of a foreign land. The meeting between Crassus and the Parthian general quickly turned into a trap. Accounts say that as Crassus mounted a horse offered by Surena's men, ostensibly so they could talk eye to eye, a scuffle broke out. Voices shouted, confusion reigned, and in an instant the Parthians seized Crassus. His remaining officers were cut down as they tried to protect him. The Romans' worst fears had come true. Crassus was now a prisoner at the mercy of his enemies. They dragged the 62-year-old Roman general before the Parthian nobles. One can only imagine Crassus's terror and despair. This was the man who once lined a road with crucified slaves to instill fear. Now he stood helpless, about to face a far crueler spectacle. The Parthians had lost countless warriors to Rome's aggression, and they thirsted for vengeance. They would not grant Crassus a clean death by sword or spear. They intended to make him an example, a message written in agony and gore. Crassus was forced to his knees, his arms bound tightly behind him. Perhaps he struggled, pleading to be treated with honor as a Roman consul. But mocking laughter was the only reply. Before him, Parthian soldiers brought out a cauldron and began stoking a blazing fire beneath it. Crassus's eyes widened as he realized what they intended. Into the iron pot, they heaped a fortune in gold coins and jewelry, the very treasure he had dreamed of capturing. As the fire roared, the gold turned first red, then a brilliant, molten yellow. It was now a liquid death, shimmering hotly in the desert dusk. They pried open Crassus's mouth. Rough hands yanked back his head by the hair. In that heartbeat before the agony, perhaps Crassus understood the terrible poetry of this moment. His boundless greed was about to consume him, literally. A Parthian noble sneered, "Drink, Crassus, drink!" offering the Roman his prize. And then came the final blow. A soldier tipped the cauldron. Molten gold poured out in a gleaming stream. It splashed onto Crassus's lips and chin, instantly searing his flesh. He tried to scream, but the molten metal surged into his open mouth, scalding his tongue, his throat, his lungs. Steam burst from his mouth and nostrils with a ghastly hiss, as soft tissues were cooked by the heat. Inside his body, the gold congealed in bubbling lumps, tearing everything it touched. Crassus's eyes bulged in agony. His muffled screams were unlike any sound. a gurgling, choking howl as the liquid fire silenced his voice forever. The stench of burnt flesh and hair filled the air. Some witnesses turned away in horror. Others watched, transfixed by the savage justice of it all. Moment by moment, the richest man in Rome died in unbearable pain, executed by the very substance he had coveted above all. When it was over, Crassus's body toppled forward, smoke curling from his gaping mouth. Golden blood dripped from his lips, a gruesome symbol that his insatiable thirst for wealth had finally been quenched. Marcus Licinius Crassus was dead, and his awful punishment was complete. But even in death, his humiliation was not yet finished. The Parthians, reveling in their victory, took further revenge on Crassus's remains. They severed his head, slick with sweat and blood, and one account says they filled the skull with more molten gold as a final insult. The head, blackened and hollow-eyed, was sent as a trophy to King Orodes II of Parthia. Orodes, the Parthian king, was celebrating a wedding feast when Crassus's head arrived. In a morbid twist of fate, the king's entourage decided to use the dead Roman's head as a prop in a theatrical performance. As legend tells it, an actor took the head and held it aloft during a recitation of Euripides's play, the Bacchae. In that ancient tragedy, a vengeful god drives a mother to tear off her own son's head. Now, before the Parthian court, Crassus's severed head became the grisly stand-in for the play's climax. Laughter echoed through the banquet hall as the actor shouted his lines, brandishing the head of Rome's once mighty financier general for all to see. The message was unmistakable. Rome's greed and hubris had been decapitated and mocked on the world stage. News of Crassus's annihilation and obscene death sent shockwaves through Rome. This was more than just the death of a consul. It was one of the worst military disasters in Roman history. 20,000 Roman soldiers were dead, thousands more captured, and the treasured Roman battle standards were now in Parthian hands. The Roman Republic was aghast. How could one of their top leaders suffer such a degrading, macabre end? In Rome's forums, people whispered of the curse that had befallen Crassus, of gods punishing his arrogance. Some refused to believe the tale of the molten gold. It was too horrific, too perfect a punishment for greed. Yet the surviving soldiers grimly confirmed the grim fate of their commander. For the Parthians, Crassus's death was a triumph to savor. They had not only defeated a Roman army, they had symbolically destroyed Rome's avarice in the form of Crassus. The ghastly execution served as a deterrent, a warning to Rome of Parthia's might, and a reminder that overreaching ambition could meet a terrible end. Indeed, Rome hesitated to seek revenge immediately. The trauma of Carrhae lingered. It would be years before Rome dared challenge Parthia again. In the meantime, the story of Crassus's golden death spread across both empires, growing into legend. It became a cautionary tale told by firelight. How greed led a man to swallow fire, and how even the mightiest can be brought low by their own vices. The cruel death of Marcus Crassus forces us to confront the dark potential of human cruelty and ambition. Here was a man who had everything: wealth beyond measure, influence over the Republic, and yet he hungered for more. That hunger drove him to wage an unjust war in a distant land, costing tens of thousands of lives. In the end, Crassus's own life was taken in a manner so vicious, so symbolic, that it reads like moral poetry. We can't help but ask, did his greed merit such a fate? The Parthians chose a punishment that gave poetic justice a blood-soaked literalness, making a man consume in death what he most loved in life. It speaks to a universal theme: unbridled greed can lead to destruction. Crassus's demise is a stark reminder that the pursuit of wealth and glory at the expense of all else can pave one's road to ruin. Think of the fear that must have gripped those who heard this story in ancient times. The visceral image of molten metal, the embodiment of avarice, becoming an executioner. It's a tale that forces us to reflect on our own desires and choices. Would we have the wisdom to rein in such ambition? Or would we charge forward as Crassus did, blind to the consequences? In a world where power often goes unchecked, the fate of Crassus stands as an unforgettable example of hubris punished. His story endures precisely because it is so extreme, a dark mirror of what can happen when human cruelty and poetic justice converge in one horrifying moment. Thank you for watching and delving into this dark chapter of history with me. How does this story make you feel? Does it chill your blood or make you ponder the price of greed? I'd love to hear your thoughts and reactions in the comments. Remember, history is filled with tales as cautionary as this one. If you thought the death of Crassus was horrifying, wait until you hear about the man whose intestines were pulled out in our next brutal tale. Make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more stories from the shadows of history, because sometimes the past has some very dark secrets to share.